Okay, Jim's going to have a go at some of your questions. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Oh, I love that. That's got a disclaimer written all over it. Have a go at the questions. I appreciate that. All right, let's do the bane of judges with barristers is that they dance around. The judge wants to know something, and barristers, if they don't want to sort of say exactly that, dance around it. So I've, particularly with one judge who is now a very senior judge, Justice Greenwood, who's now retired, I always made it a point to try to hit it. So I've picked the hardest question first. Where is that? Oh, here. Consensus is not expected in Parliament. Why is it so critical for the voice? That's a good question. The USB is put away, but if you recall the actual amending legislation, the voice is empowered at its discretion to make recommendations relevant to First Nations people. Why is it, if consensus is not expected in Parliament, why is it so critical for the voice? Because the power of the voice to make the recommendation is based on a unified voice, as you read that, to make recommendations. Now, that's my reading of it. It could be that that's interpreted this way, that can make recommendations. Maybe the voice emanates 3 representations, and it's for the government to adopt those. I've just using statutory interpretation to say they have this power and they can make a recommendation. The difficulty, I suppose it's not a difficulty, if the government and Parliament is considering, an executive is considering recommendations from the voice, they possibly could be more than one, but the difficulty is that by not having a unified voice, you are going to satisfy possibly the one you adopt, if you adopt, and at the expense of the others. So I don't ask for who asked that. I understand that the voice representatives are going to be appointed, not elected. Do you think that could cause problems? There are representatives now, and since ACSIC folded, but there are representatives who are appointed by the government. I don't see a problem with that. Consistent with what I was saying, I think that my experience is there's difficulty in having consensus for elected roles, and it would be better for them, as I understand it's going to be, that there are submissions made for certain elders from certain communities to be considered as a voice. It won't be I wouldn't have thought a fixed panel, but rather it'll be a group of individuals that have been appointed from inquiries made by government. I don't see that's an issue, because I think that there could be more of an issue by having elections for it. Do you think a definition of who is an Aboriginal will have to be made? How could that be done? I have no idea. That's going into the area of, are you the author of that? That's going into the area of, am I 1/16th? I don't know anything about that. Yeah, but obviously, look, I mean, you know, as much as you might think this is a lawyer saying this, but law is about being just. Law is about something a reasonable person would think. You know, that senior counsel, Angelo Vasta, just said to me, if it doesn't sound right, it's probably not right. Then we're going to look at the minutiae of the legislation and the cases and that. But look, obviously, if you have a definition of an Australian Aboriginal person or First Nations person, there must be now, even for social security, I would have thought, certain rights that are given now, you would have to show some entitlement to that. Well, that'll be a manifestation of that, and it'll be something similar to that. Seems like your key points. Oh, this is. Who's the judge in the room? This is what a judge says before they knock me down. Seems like your key points, Mr. Eliades, were comparing the voice to ASIC, and we all know the damage that came out of that. This is a different time with the different people. Well, yeah, okay, but the circumstances might not be different if they're repeated. I mean, in a way, and it's not limited to First Nations people. You know, human nature being what it is, and there might be a proclivity to take advantage of money being thrown at you, and that's not limited to them. But in that example, I'm not painting the members of The Voice with what happened with ATSIC, but there is a danger, as it was with ATSIC, that there was no restriction or limitation. They thought there were audits, etc. But there just has to be, I guess it's not a guilt that these things are being provided that is the result of that. It's got to be a genuine feeling that they're entitled as human beings to be recognised, and a recognition of what had been done. Government not obliged to accept recommendations. Well, it's not obliged to accept all recommendations. Well, that's a good point. That's a good point, and that's the point that turned me on this this thing that said that they may make recommendations, and this critical. I heard the criticism a few times. Look, there's no structure to what they can do. Well, if you look at my area, copyright, that just says the Parliament has power to make laws in respect of copyright. It doesn't say, you know, that this is the way it should be done. So there's no reason to saddle and thrust on the Voice an obligation to articulate how it's going to be used. It'll be in Parliament, as with all the other powers that are in Section 51. No consensus, for anyone about any matters referred to government, but is this a case of the perfect being the enemy of the good? I don't fully understand what that means. If anybody can help me with that? Trying to flush out the author, obviously. Yeah, well, let's have another reread. No consensus from it.
Whoever it is saying you're talking about the issue that there's no guarantee there'll be a consensus, and that's obviously the ideal. But should you not support things just because you can't get the ideal? I think that's the question. I could be correct in my work.
Yes. That makes sense. There is another dynamic, though, that works with that, and that is that whilst there might not be consensus with something, there should, I would expect, be a feeling that if we don't have consensus on something, then it's not going to be put forward. So some elements may put down to allow the recommendation to be made. As I said, I'm not an authority that says there has to be consensus, but it seems to me that the way that The Voice is being set up, having read the explanatory memorandum, that there's an expectation that The Voice will reflect the wider concerns of the First Nations people, and that would be something that would have some consensus, because it would be a serious matter. And as I say, some elements might put down their view for the overall good of it being made a recommendation. Can you say more about how your faith has influenced your perspective on Aboriginal rights? Well, I've never been someone who can rattle off verses and things like that, but there's a verse in Micah, and I think it's 6:8 or something, but it says, what does God expect of you? He expects you to be just and to walk with God. And justice is a big thing in that. And there's other verses that sort of say that, you know, you should stand up for those that can't stand up for themselves. And that's why it was a pleasure to do the artists that came from the Arts Law Centre, because they couldn't afford anybody. And, you know, it really grates me, and I see it. I mean, I've acted for big corporations, for government, and against big corporation, and it grates me how when something's good, whether it's an invention or whether it's a copyright work, there's always sharks coming around that want to piggyback on that and use it. And in many cases, the inventor, the artist, has used a lot of their money coming up with the invention, coming up with the works, and doesn't know how to get it off the platform, yet these other companies can. I relish relish the chance when I see a case that's really good against a big corporation, because I know, okay, you're going to make me work for it in many cases, but ultimately I will win. And that's just a reflection on justice. I think, you know, I don't think I was going to mention this because it might be against me, but I've had a client for 15, 16 years. The Hells Angels Motorcycle Corporation owns a portfolio of trademarks, and many people think it's really cool to reproduce. It's a skull with the flaming wings on the thing. To reproduce that, I have had the rare privilege of witnessing to the president of Hells Angels and saying, look, we've got a big case now that went before 5 judges of the federal court, and I just say, look, I'm not hoping to win. I'm just hoping God does whatever God wants to do in it. And if we lose, well, there's a reason for it. You don't get chances like that very often, you know, but it's justice. I mean, just because they own trademarks, just because they're the Hells Angels Motorcycle Corporation, a group of motorcycle enthusiasts, doesn't mean that they have less rights than anybody else. And that's really, the bar is a little bit different. You can't be judgmental in that respect. You're an advocate, but I personally feel that when I see someone who can't fight a big player, that doesn't scare me, and I find that I'm convicted to use what I know for their benefit. If the vote is no, do you think? I think this is the last question. It is. If the vote is no. We're using red now. This is highlighting the importance of this question and saying, if you don't answer this right, this will be you. If the vote is no, do you think there will be another better opportunity? So is a yes better than doing nothing? Look, my view is there must be a better opportunity if this is a no vote, because it'll be taken, I think, adversely by the First Nations people if it's a no vote. Again, I haven't decided which way I'm going, but is a yes better than doing nothing? Well, having read the legislation and having dispelled some of the rumours around that were passed on to me, and I can't justify those, and as I was saying to gentleman who just came in now, Colin, Tom. I was just saying to Tom, I think it's a step in the right direction, and why do they have to wait for another opportunity? Will that not reflect that we don't consider them to be equal? I don't know. Those are the things I'm going to be deliberating over the next time. As I say, my concern was originally with a unanimity of a voice, but I'm starting to wonder if that's a stance that will justify a position when the vote is taken. That's the last question, and thank you for your questions. Thank you for your time. Thanks for listening to me.